You think you're a fun grandparent, the one who breaks the rules, sneaks extra cookies, and tells the kids secrets their parents don't want them to hear. And you believe that makes you beloved. Here's the truth nobody's telling you. That behavior is precisely why your grandchildren will stop calling when they turn 18. I've spent 40 years in clinical psychology working with families, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the grandparents who think they're winning by being the cool rule breaker are actually destroying their relationships one small transgression at a time. Let me share something that will shock you. A 2023 longitudinal study from the University of Michigan tracked grandparent-grandchild relationships over 15 years. The researchers found that grandchildren exposed to frequent subtle criticism were 2.3 times more likely to limit contact after reaching adulthood. Not major blow-ups, not screaming matches, subtle criticism, the kind you probably don't even realize you're doing. The helpful comments about parenting choices, the sighs when your daughter-in-law serves dinner, the eye roll when your son enforces screen time limits. Here's what's happening in your grandchild's brain when you make these comments. Children as young as 6 years old can detect sarcasm and negative tone, according to research published in Developmental Psychology in 2021. Their anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain responsible for detecting social threats and emotional conflicts, lights up when they hear passive-aggressive remarks directed at their parents or their family's choices. That's the same brain region that activates when they experience pain. You're not just making a comment. You're creating a neurological association between spending time with you and experiencing discomfort. And it compounds. Every snide remark, every undermining comment, every time you contradict their parents' authority creates what family systems therapists call microtraumas, individual moments that seem insignificant but accumulate into a psychological barrier. By the time that child is a teenager, they've experienced hundreds or thousands of these moments. Their brain has learned that being around you means managing conflict, defending their family, or suppressing their authentic reactions to keep the peace. Now, I'm going to reveal 5 specific behaviors that are sabotaging your relationship with your grandchildren. Some of them you're doing right now. Some of them you've probably done this week. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how to fix them, because despite what you might fear, these patterns are completely reversible. But first, you need to understand the foundational mistake most grandparents make. You believe your decades of life experience give you the right to correct, comment, and critique how your adult children are raising their kids. You're wrong. Your life experience gives you exactly one thing: the opportunity to be a supportive, consistent presence. That's it. The moment you step over that line, you activate what psychologists call triangulation, where the grandchild gets caught between competing loyalties. And here's what the research shows. Children who experience triangulation demonstrate increased cortisol levels, the stress hormone, during family gatherings. Their bodies are literally in fight-or-flight mode when they should be feeling safe and loved. Let me tell you about the first behavior that's pushing your grandchildren away. You make passive-aggressive or snide remarks about family choices. And before you protest that you're just joking or just making conversation, understand that your grandchild doesn't perceive it that way. When you say, "Back in my day, we didn't need all these fancy gadgets," you think you're sharing wisdom. Your grandchild hears, "Your parents are doing it wrong," and by extension, your life is wrong. Here's the neuroscience behind why this damages relationships so severely. The developing brain, from ages 6 through 18, is extraordinarily sensitive to perceived rejection and criticism. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex becomes hyperactive when adolescents feel socially excluded or judged. This hyperactivity doesn't just cause momentary discomfort. It literally reshapes neural pathways, making the brain more sensitive to future criticism and more likely to avoid situations where criticism might occur. Translation: every time you make a snide comment, you're training your grandchild's brain to associate you with threat, not comfort. The University of Michigan study I mentioned earlier tracked this phenomenon across 15 years. They found that by age 18, grandchildren who experienced frequent subtle criticism had fundamentally different relationship patterns with their grandparents compared to those who didn't. The criticism group used words like obligatory, tense, and careful to describe visits. The non-criticism group used words like comfortable, fun, and easy. The difference wasn't in the amount of time spent together or geographic proximity. It was entirely in the quality of verbal interactions. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. You probably don't realize you're doing it. In my clinical practice, I've worked with hundreds of grandparents who were genuinely shocked when shown recordings of their interactions with their grandchildren. They heard themselves making the comments they swore they never made. They saw themselves rolling their eyes when they insisted they were supportive. The disconnect between self-perception and actual behavior was massive. So what do you do instead? Replace commentary with curiosity. When you see a parenting choice that differs from your approach, instead of saying, "That's interesting," with that tone we all know means you disapprove, say this: "I'd love to understand why your family does it this way. Tell me more." That's it. No critique disguised as a question. No leading interrogation. Genuine curiosity about how your grandchild's family operates. Here's why this works neurologically. When you ask with genuine curiosity, you activate the grandchild's ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region associated with positive social interactions and reward processing. You're telling their brain, "This person is safe. This person values me and my family." That's the foundation for a relationship that lasts into their adulthood and beyond. The second behavior destroying your relationship is forcing physical affection without consent. And I can already hear some of you getting defensive. I'm their grandparent. A hug isn't abuse. Nobody said it was abuse, but it is a violation of bodily autonomy, and that violation has consequences you need to understand. A 2022 report from the American Academy of Pediatrics states explicitly that forced affection teaches children that their no doesn't matter, particularly when that message comes from trusted adults. Think about what you're communicating when you say, "Come on, just one hug for grandma," after a child has already declined. You're teaching them that adult comfort matters more than their bodily boundaries. You're teaching them that when someone older or in authority wants physical contact, their discomfort is irrelevant. Now let's talk about what happens in the child's brain during forced affection. For neurotypical children, unwanted touch activates the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. For neurodivergent children, particularly those with sensory processing differences, the experience is even more intense. Forced touch can trigger a genuine neurological overload where the sensory input is so overwhelming that the child's nervous system goes into shutdown mode. Here's the data that should concern you. In a 2024 survey of 1,200 teenagers aged 13 to 17, 68% said they avoided grandparents who ignored physical boundaries. 41% admitted they fake illness to skip visits. Read that again. Nearly half of teenagers would rather lie and miss family gatherings than be around grandparents who don't respect their physical autonomy. And it gets worse as they age. These aren't just uncomfortable moments that children forget. These are relationship-defining patterns that shape how young adults interact with you for the rest of your life. The same survey found that by age 25, 32% of respondents had either gone no contact or severely limited contact with boundary-violating grandparents. What's the alternative? Offer choice every single time. Would you like a hug, a high five, or just a wave? That's the script. It's not complicated. It takes 3 seconds, and it fundamentally changes the dynamic because you're communicating respect. You're telling the grandchild that their comfort matters. You're building trust instead of eroding it. Some of you are thinking, but what if they never choose the hug? Then they never choose the hug, and you survive that disappointment. Your desire for physical affection doesn't override their right to bodily autonomy. And here's what's fascinating. Research shows that children who are given choice in physical affection are actually more likely to initiate it voluntarily. When they know their no will be respected, they feel safe saying yes. The third behavior, and this one is absolutely critical, is undermining parents' authority with helpful exceptions. You think you're being a fun grandparent when you sneak candy after parents said no. You think you're building a special bond when you let them stay up late and say, "Don't tell mom." You're actually creating what family systems theory calls a cross-generational coalition, and it's one of the most destructive patterns in family dynamics. Here's what happens. When you undermine parental authority, you force the grandchild into an impossible loyalty conflict. They love you. They love their parents. Now they have to choose which relationship to protect. And here's what the research shows. They don't choose you. A 2020 study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that grandparental undermining predicted a 35% increase in child behavior problems and a 28% drop in grandparent closeness by adolescents. Let me explain the mechanism. When parents set a boundary and you violate it, you're not building trust with the grandchild. You're teaching them that rules are arbitrary and that authority figures can't be trusted to maintain consistency. This creates what developmental psychologists call an unstable attachment pattern. The child learns that the world is unpredictable, that different adults have completely different standards, and that navigating family relationships requires manipulation and secret keeping. This shows up in brain development. Children who experience frequent adult disagreements about rules and boundaries show increased activity in the anterior insula during decision-making tasks. This is the brain region associated with uncertainty and anxiety. They're literally more anxious about making choices because they've learned that every choice might be right for one adult and wrong for another, and it destroys your relationship with your adult children. When you undermine their parenting, you communicate that you don't respect their judgment or authority. This creates a fundamental breach of trust that extends far beyond the immediate moment. Your adult child stops bringing the grandchildren around because every visit becomes a battle to maintain their parenting standards against your interference. What should you do instead? Support the parents publicly. Discuss disagreements privately. If you think a rule is unnecessarily strict, you don't get to override it at the moment. You have a private conversation with your adult child, express your perspective once, and then defer to their decision. When you're with the grandchildren, you reinforce parental rules. I know mom said no sweets after 6. Let's find a fun alternative together. That's how you build trust with both generations. The fourth behavior is keeping a mental scorecard of favoritism or slights. You say things like, "Your cousins came over twice this month. When are you visiting?" Or, "I got you the bigger gift." Remember that. You think you're communicating your love. You're actually turning love into a transaction, and transactions don't build secure attachments. According to attachment theory, secure attachment develops when children experience unconditional positive regard. That means love without conditions, without scorekeeping, without comparisons. When you introduce conditions, "I love you because you visit more," or "I favor you because you help with yard work," you create anxious or avoidant attachment patterns. Here's the research. A 2021 UK study examined perceived scorekeeping in grandparent-grandchild relationships. Grandchildren who felt their grandparents kept score were 3 times more likely to describe the relationship as obligatory rather than close. 3 times. They didn't feel loved, they felt indebted, and debt is not the foundation for a lasting relationship. Neuroscience explains why. When love is conditional, it activates the brain's social pain network, the same regions that process physical pain. The grandchild experiences your scorekeeping as a form of rejection. I'm only valued for what I provide, not for who I am. This creates what psychologists call contingent self-worth, where the child's sense of value becomes dependent on meeting external expectations rather than internal qualities, and it spreads across the sibling network. When you compare grandchildren to each other, you don't motivate the underperforming one to visit more. You create resentment, rivalry, and distance. The grandchild who hears, "Why can't you be more like your cousin who always calls?" doesn't think, "Grandma's right, I should call more." They think, "Nothing I do is good enough. Why bother trying? How do you fix this?" Celebrate each grandchild's unique presence without comparison. Focus on the moment you're in, not the moments you're missing. When you see a grandchild, make that interaction about them, not about who visited more recently, or who gave bigger gifts, or who met your expectations better. Remove fairness from the equation. Love isn't fair. Love is abundant, and it doesn't diminish by being given freely. The fifth and final behavior is prioritizing personal agendas over consistent presence. You cancel planned visits for golf trips or cruises. You're physically present but emotionally distracted, scrolling your phone while your grandchild tells you a story. You repeatedly say, "We'll do something fun next time," and next time never comes. Here's what children learn from inconsistent presence. They're not a priority. A 2023 study in child development showed that inconsistent grandparent availability in ages 5 through 12 predicted emotional disengagement by age 16, even more than geographic distance. Let me repeat that. Inconsistency damages the relationship more than distance. A grandparent who lives across the country but maintains regular video calls and keeps promises builds stronger bonds than a grandparent who lives nearby but is unreliable. The reason is neurological. Children's brains are wired to interpret reliability as safety and safety as love. When you consistently show up, you activate the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. When you're inconsistent, you create an unpredictable environment that keeps the child's stress response system chronically activated. They never fully relax around you because they can't predict whether you'll be present or withdrawn. Neuroscientist Dr. Sara Algatt-Bergstrom's research on what she calls micro-moments is crucial here. She's found that grandchildren remember 5 to 7 second interactions, a genuine smile, sustained eye contact, remembering a detail from a previous conversation. more than grand gestures. 15 focused minutes of attention creates stronger neural pathways than 2 distracted hours. Quality isn't just better than quantity. Quality actually builds the neurological foundation for attachment in ways that quantity without attention never can. What's the solution? Block recurring grandkid time on your calendar and treat it as non-negotiable. Not if nothing else comes up. Not unless something better happens, non-negotiable. The same way you wouldn't miss a doctor's appointment or a flight. Your relationship with your grandchildren deserves that level of commitment. And when you're with them, be fully present. Put your phone in another room, make eye contact, ask questions about their lives, and actually listen to the answers. Remember what they tell you and bring it up next time. These micro moments accumulate into a pattern your grandchild's brain recognizes as, this person consistently shows up for me. This person is safe. This person loves me. Now let's talk about what all 5 of these behaviors have in common. They're all forms of making your comfort, your preferences, your agenda more important than the grandchild's needs. The snide remarks make you feel superior. The forced affection meets your need for physical connection. Undermining parents lets you feel like the fun one. Scorekeeping soothes your ego. Inconsistent presence prioritizes your schedule. Every single one of these behaviors is about you, not them. And children know it. Their brains are extraordinarily attuned to detecting whether adults are focused on the child's well-being or the adult's needs. When they sense it's the latter, they protect themselves by withdrawing. Here's what I want you to understand. You can change this right now, today. These patterns aren't permanent personality traits. They're behaviors, and behaviors can be modified. The research is clear that grandparents who become aware of these patterns and actively work to change them see dramatic improvements in relationship quality within months. Start with one behavior. Pick the one that resonated most as you've been watching this. Maybe you recognized yourself making passive-aggressive comments. Maybe you realized you've been forcing hugs. Maybe you saw how you've been undermining your adult children's parenting. Choose one pattern and commit to changing it for the next 30 days. Here's your specific action plan. First, tell your adult children what you're working on. Say, I've realized I've been making comments that undermine your parenting, and I'm going to stop. If you hear me slip into old patterns, please call me out immediately. This does 3 things. It holds you accountable, it rebuilds trust with your adult children, and it models healthy behavior change for your grandchildren. Second, develop a replacement behavior. You can't just stop doing something. You have to replace it with something else. If you tend to make snide comments, practice your curiosity script. Tell me more about why your family does it this way. If you force affection, practice offering choices. If you undermine rules, practice saying, "What did Mom say about this?" before making any decisions. Third, track your progress. Keep a simple journal. After each interaction with your grandchildren, write down one thing you did well and one thing you want to improve. This metacognitive practice, thinking about your thinking, strengthens the neural pathways associated with behavior change. You're literally rewiring your brain to interact differently. And here's what will happen. Within 2 weeks, you'll notice your grandchildren are more relaxed around you. Within a month, your adult children will trust you more with unsupervised time. Within 3 months, you'll have fundamentally reset the relationship dynamic. The research on neuroplasticity tells us that new neural pathways form rapidly when behavior change is consistent and intentional. I want to address something I know some of you are feeling right now. You're hurt. You're thinking, I've given so much to this family. I've loved these grandchildren since they were born. And now I'm being told I'm doing it all wrong. That's not what I'm saying. You're not doing it all wrong. You're doing a few specific things that are sabotaging your relationships, and those things can be fixed. The strongest grandparent-grandchild bonds aren't built on shared DNA or financial gifts. They're built on consistent respect, genuine curiosity, and reliable presence. Those 3 elements create what attachment researchers call earned secure attachment. Even if you've made these mistakes for years, you can earn a secure attachment moving forward by changing your behavior patterns. Let me give you some hope. In my clinical practice, I've worked with dozens of grandparents who implemented these changes and completely transformed their relationships. One grandmother I worked with hadn't seen her teenage granddaughter in 2 years because of boundary violations and criticism. After 6 months of consistently respecting boundaries and replacing criticism with curiosity, the granddaughter voluntarily asked to spend a weekend with her. That's the power of intentional behavior change. Another grandfather I coached had been undermining his daughter-in-law's parenting for years. The relationship was so damaged that visits were supervised and limited to holidays. He committed to publicly supporting all parental decisions for 6 months. No exceptions. exceptions, no secret rule-breaking, just consistent support. Within that time frame, his daughter-in-law asked him to babysit regularly. Trust rebuilt. These aren't miraculous transformations. They're the predictable result of applying relationship science. When you stop doing things that trigger threat responses in your grandchildren's brains and start doing things that trigger bonding and safety responses, relationships heal. It's neuroscience, not magic. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in these discussions: the role of pride and ego in maintaining these destructive patterns. Many grandparents resist change because admitting these behaviors means acknowledging that they've caused harm. That's an incredibly difficult pill to swallow, especially for people who genuinely love their grandchildren and believe they were doing their best. But here's the reality: your intentions don't matter nearly as much as your impact. You can have the purest intentions in the world, but if your behavior is pushing your grandchildren away, those intentions are irrelevant. What matters is the actual outcome of your actions on the developing brains and emotional systems of the children you love. The grandparents who successfully transform these relationships are the ones who can set aside their ego long enough to hear difficult feedback. They're the ones who can say, "I was wrong. I didn't understand how my behavior was affecting you. I'm going to do better." That level of humility is rare, but it's also what makes genuine reconciliation possible. And there's another dimension to this that's worth exploring. Many of these behaviors stem from your own unmet needs and unresolved wounds. When you criticize your adult children's parenting choices, you're often defending your own parenting decisions. When you keep score, you're revealing your own feelings of being undervalued or overlooked. When you undermine boundaries, you're trying to reclaim a sense of importance or control that you feel you've lost. Understanding the root of these behaviors doesn't excuse them, but it does make them easier to address. If you can identify what unmet need is driving your behavior, you can find healthier ways to meet that need. Feeling undervalued? Join a community group or volunteer organization where your contributions are celebrated. Feeling like you've lost importance? Find meaning in hobbies, friendships, or causes that matter to you. Defensive about your parenting? Work with a therapist to process those old wounds so they stop bleeding into your current relationships. The point is this: your grandchildren cannot and should not be responsible for meeting your emotional needs. That's not their job. Their job is to grow, learn, and develop into healthy adults. Your job is to provide a consistent, safe, loving presence that supports that development. When you reverse those roles and expect them to validate you, reassure you, or prioritize you, you're creating an unhealthy dynamic that will ultimately push them away. Here's my final challenge to you. Decide right now which behavior you're going to change first. Post it in the comments. Tell me your location and which of these 5 patterns you recognize in yourself. The act of public commitment increases your likelihood of follow-through by 65%, according to behavioral psychology research. You're not just accountable to yourself anymore. You're accountable to this community. And if you're worried it's too late, that the damage is already done, let me be clear. It's almost never too late. I've seen grandparents in their 80s rebuild relationships with adult grandchildren in their 30s. The human capacity for forgiveness and reconnection is remarkable, but it requires genuine behavior change, not just apologies. Your grandchildren don't need perfect grandparents. They need consistent, respectful, present grandparents who are willing to learn and grow. That's what you're choosing to become by watching this video and implementing these changes. That's the legacy that actually matters. Not the money you leave them, not the gifts you bought, but the quality of presence you offered when you were alive. Start today. Choose one behavior. Commit to changing it. Watch your relationships transform. This isn't theoretical. This is practical, evidence-based relationship science that works when you actually apply it. Your grandchildren are worth the effort. You're worth the effort. These relationships are worth the effort. Now go do the work. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.